Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Accountability Board for November. We're fairly light, SCT light today. Perhaps it's the 18th. We'll quickly go around the room insofar as we're around the table and say who we are. So, Laura, if we can start with you over there.
Yep, Laura Kostikiewicz, and I'm the Rotherham District Commander.
Sarah Pullman, ACC for Crime and Vulnerability.
I'm Tim Ford, I'm the Deputy Chief Constable.
Sally Parker, Police and Compliance Officer.
Sharon Baldwin, Officer Police and Crime Commission Evaluation and Scrutiny.
Michelle Butcher, Chief Executive in the OPCC.
Alan Billings, the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Michael Lewis, Chair, Independent Ethics Panel.
Steve Wright, Chair of JAC.
Thank you very much, and I think we can see those who are online because we can see them in the sidebar, so you're very welcome. So, going straight into our agenda, just to remind you that we are being live streamed and recorded, and that will duly go onto the website after this meeting. Item 3 then, announcements. Are there any announcements? Item 4, public questions. I don't think there are any. Sally?
No.
Item 5, urgent items. Tim, I thought it might be useful just to have a quick update on where we're at in terms of the protests that have been happening in Sheffield and Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham.
Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner. So we have, on numerous occasions over the last couple of weeks, seen some limited protest activity across all districts within South Yorkshire, but mainly within Sheffield. These protests have numbered on occasions up to 400 people in Sheffield. By and large, these protests have passed off relatively peacefully. There have been a number of offences committed, a number of people have been arrested. Very small. I think off the top of my head it's about 4 people that have been arrested, and those investigations are currently live and ongoing at the moment. We recognise obviously that there is a huge amount of public concern about events happening in the Middle East at the moment, and that people will wish to express a voice around those events. What we're absolutely determined is that we will not allow people to allow the right to peacefully protest translate into hate crime or more serious offences, but we will continue to engage with all communities to make sure that we do that in a way that reflects the British model of policing by consent. We have a designated command structure in place to make sure that we can plan effectively for protests, because I don't think this is something that's going to go away over the next couple of weeks. It's a situation that has both my Chief Constable and the entire command teams scrutiny to make sure that it's dealt with in a proportionately effective manner.
But so far people have protested and they're not too many then overstepping the mark.
Well,
and
we have had some instances where
yes,
people have been arrested for a variety of different offences. There are some other offences where we are still trying to identify the offender, but what we've not seen is protests anything like on the scale that you might have seen in London or in other major cities. It is relatively contained, and we're continuing to provide a very proportionate, what I believe is a very proportionate policing response to that, and we'll continue to do so.
And tricky sometimes when you've had football matches on the same day and you've got to manage all of that.
Well, if you just take the weekend, I'm aware, if you take the weekend just gone, not only is it bonfire night weekend, which is always a very, very busy weekend for South Yorkshire Police, making sure that people can enjoy those events safely. Aside from the normal football fixtures, we have 2 FA Cup fixtures this weekend, which come in at relatively short notice because of the nature of the draw, as well as multiple protests across the force. So these events do put a strain on the force in terms of our ability to manage them all, but it's something that we're well used to. Our planning department's been doing a sterling job in terms of making sure that we've got the right command structures wrapped around these incidents and that they're properly resourced. And again, looking forward to next weekend. Obviously it's armistice events this weekend. We've got Millwall visiting Sheffield Wednesday, which is a big football fixture, as well as other events going on in the county.
Yes, as you said, busy, very busy weekend. And in terms of dark nights and bonfire nights, that has passed off.
Well, it has been. I think we'd probably describe it as probably slightly quieter than previous years, but obviously the weather has probably got some part to play in that because of the very, very inclement weather over the weekend. I think that probably subdues some of the issues that we would normally see.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes,
I'll ask an associated question. When there have been problems in the Middle East, in previous years we've had reports about spikes in hate crime. Is there any early indication of something similar happening this time?
We haven't had the data as yet, Michael. We will be getting that, and I know that Mark Goddard, who is our hate crime lead for the force, he's been linked in since day, I think it was about the 8th or 9th of October when we started seeing obviously the Hamas attack over the weekend, and then that week he's been heavily involved in the force response, so careful monitoring of our hate crime statistics. We know that elsewhere in the country there's been a huge rise in anti-Semitic crime. We do have a relatively small Jewish population across South Yorkshire, but we are carefully monitoring that, and we can find out the specific stats and come back to you.
Certainly nothing's caught you up that you might have seen elsewhere in the country.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. That was all under item 5, urgent items. Items to be considered in the absence of the public and the press, I don't think there are any. So we move on to 7, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? None. 8, minutes of the PAB for the 7th of September. They've been circulated. Anybody got any questions or comment on that? I accept those as an accurate account. And actions arising. I think there's only in the appendix about Belado.
That was from the previous meeting, yeah.
That was a
the
previous.
outstanding actions.
So there's nothing else?
No.
Okay, thank you. So we come to force performance then, and item 10, it's the Rotherham District summary update. Laura, the District Commander, is here. We'll do what we normally do, Laura, not go through it page by page, but I'll ask you some questions, and then if there are things that you want to raise with us, then please feel free to do so. There's just a general comment I make, and I don't know how you would want to deal with this or comment around this, but just reading the report, you refer a number of times to a real struggle around resources, and there's some suggestion that perhaps when the new recruits make their way through into the districts, things will change. We keep hearing that, and I thought when we got to September that was going to make a difference, and now it seems to be being put off again. Could you say something around this pressure of resources?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a challenging position, and it's not straightforward as to why we keep having this narrative. So we did anticipate that September would be the point where we started to feel much healthier in our staffing. However, due to the challenges before that, a lot of the postings decisions were delayed, so posting into other specialist units, into the region, into other areas of business were delayed because we were struggling to accommodate those within our staffing picture. So what happened then, September came along, and actually we had to release people quite rightly into specialist posts or into the regional posts, which then almost wiped out the benefits we got from the new recruits landing. It is a steadily improving picture, so I can tell you that I have a healthier response policing function now than I did 9 months ago, so it is steadily improving. What that's not yet done is filter through into my neighbourhood teams as an example, so I have some significant vacancies into my neighbourhood teams. We're recruiting at the minute, so we're trying to balance those vacancies across all the 3 pillars. I think we anticipate that the next big drop of students will be March. But we're going to see a similar sort of position in March. In fact, we've paused quite a lot of the moves at this point in time. So we did a lot of moves in September. We've paused quite a lot of the moves now until March, and then we'll do quite a lot of moves in March. So we actually anticipate, realistically, it'll not feel much healthier until the summertime next year. But it is a gradually improving picture as we go on.
Okay, so the new date is in March.
March is when we see the next big drop, but as I say, at that point in time we will also lose a big chunk of people. And I think the other thing at play nationally as well around resources is the pension changes, and we will see a lot of people retiring over the next period of time around the pension changes. So we anticipate that the retirement will increase as well.
I think what we've realised is there's no golden date because of the churn and the movement of staff, the need to fill specialist roles. For example, we've had both the child exploitation teams in Doncaster and Barnsley created. Barnsley's fully staffed now. Doncaster's got a couple of more people to move into that team. So we're trying to strengthen our response across the breadth of policing. What that means is we're taking from the more experienced on the response teams, who then have to be backfilled by the less experienced. So it's a constant churn. So I think, in hindsight, we thought of these dates as, well, it's going to feel better then. But actually, because of the delays in movement elsewhere that Laura has articulated, it's constantly changing. And it's a real balancing act that Dan, through the Workforce Deployment Board, is constantly navigating, trying to keep all teams fit for purpose simultaneously, whilst kind of servicing the swirls in the student rotations, the demands for the ROCU, the demands for CTP&E, transferees, all of those sort of things. So it is an ever-changing beast. And it's fair to say.
And I think within that, it's not just the numbers of resources, it's the specialist resources as well. And on here you've got around our detective resilience, but again, there's lots of work ongoing around how to show up the detective resilience and look at developing that experience. But as we have an ever younger in service workforce, that is a challenge which we've been working through and wrestling, but there is a plan in place around how we move forward around those things.
Okay. So it's Heraclitus, and we can never step into the same river twice. That's the swirl and the churn then. But, okay. Thank you very much. I'm on page 14 now, which is protecting vulnerable people, 3.1, domestic abuse 3.1.1. And you write there, Laura, that domestic abuse volumes across Rotherham have increased, and this is contrary to the force's downward trend in the same period of 5%. I just wonder whether you could say something around that. Whether there are reasons for this. Why is Rotherham different from what's happening generally here?
What I would say is, first of all, that's only a short-term difference. So our general trends as a force is a steady upward trend, and actually that's a national trend as well. Nationally, DA increases year on year, and there's lots of reasons behind that. And one of the big ones is trust and confidence and working with our partners. And we do have a really strong partnership in Rotherham, but I'm not suggesting that's the reason for that bucking the trend and the force. I can't give you any specific reasons as to why we increased by 7% and on average the force decreased in that period by 5%. What I would say is our trend is now back in line with the force trend. It feels like it's probably just a blip rather than a trend in itself.
I suppose I'm asking really, which should give me the most encouragement, that you're down or that everyone else is up? I mean,
My answer to that.
We want to increase. We want an increase. Yeah.
I mean, my answer would be is don't place too much reliance on short-term fluctuations. I think generally, as Laura says, a high level of reporting does reflect confidence. I think, if you start to look at indices around domestic abuse that are important, outcome rates are important, repeat offending is important to look at, because if we're doing our job effectively, we should be minimising the opportunity for people to be the repeat victim of DA. So they're the things to look at, I think, more than the overall headline and short-term fluctuations.
Okay. I'm just sticking with domestic abuse and a little further down on 3.1.4.
Mm-hmm.
As I read all this, it's saying that force attendances at domestic abuse jobs are slower than other crimes.
Yeah, so we see this again as a force, and the fact that when we separate out how we respond to incidents, we have the immediates where there's an immediate risk to life, and actually our domestic abuse incidents get the same attendance times as everybody else. We routinely hit that response time for an emergency. When we're looking at that priority, which we say we should attend within an hour, what we see is the domestic abuse times are slightly slower than our general attendance at priority 8s, and there's lots of factors at play, and there's been a lot of work ongoing from a force perspective to really understand that. And quite a lot of that is down to the volume and a few outliers changing the average. So if it takes us, because the victim's not available for 3 or 4 days, we're not going to close that incident, we need to go out and see the victim. So those outliers increase our average response time. And what I would say is we have a real focus on responding to domestic abuse. It features in our daily management meetings every day, where we track the number of open DA incidents and we get an update as to the risk level and what we're doing about them, which has continued to reduce our response time to domestic abuse, and it's bringing it much more closely aligned to the average for priority 8s. And the other thing that's happened from a force is the RVR, which is in the force control room, around how can we respond virtually and support our victims more promptly at the time of the call through the force control room. So there's quite a lot at play trying to make sure that we deliver an appropriate response.
Okay. I'm on to page 15, and the graph at the top of the page, I hate graphs, but here it is. Insofar as I can understand it, is it showing me that arrest rates, there's a decreasing trend for the high risk category? Is that what it's?
Yes and no. And the challenge with our arrests around.
Yes and no. Yes.
Yes, it does on the graph. But what happens with our arrests around domestic abuse is the data takes time to catch up. So you will see on the previous month the data will always look lower, because if a high risk case came in on the last of the month, it might take us or a medium risk, it might take us a couple of weeks to arrest, and therefore it catches up to around that 90%. So what we find is a couple of months later it will hit that 90% mark, and it will always catch up. And then there's always the challenge which we have due to the complexity of our systems around some admin errors, and we have to go around and amend those admin errors. I'm really content that actually that will hit around that 90% mark, because consistently we do hit 90% around that high risk. And again, we have a lot of scrutiny through our force and district processes to make sure we do. So all of our high risk outstanding suspects get tracked through our DMM process again, and we have constant resources out there trying to locate them and arrest them.
And the numbers are very small for high. The numbers for high risk are very small compared to your mediums and standards. Obviously, you get a larger cohort as you go down the risk grading. So one arrest could push you up to 90%.
Yes.
So just to kind of put that in kind of context, we aren't talking you need to make another 20 arrests to push it up to 90%. It would probably be 1 or 2 in Rotherham, and that would be it, to get you back to where your norm is. And the acceptance around the force is around, we aspire to, it's always at 90% for high risk. And there are always reasons why, because one thing I looked at a number of years ago is why are we not arresting the 10%? But this could be foreign force inquiries, or there are reasons why. So we're satisfied, and we look at that all the time to ensure that why that discrepancy is there.
Okay. On the same page, just for noting really, 3.19 and then 10 and 11, domestic violence protection notices, DVPNs and violence protection order, DVPOs, that just seems very good, that's all, and compared with other forces we seem to be good at doing these things and getting on with it.
Absolutely, we spend a lot of time training and supporting our staff around them, because they're a really important tool for us to use.
Okay, thank you. I'm on to 3.2, Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, DVDSs, Clare's Law. I just wonder, how easy is it for people actually to apply for?
It's fairly easy. So there's different routes they can use. So they can phone up, as an example. They can go online. It's going to be changing fairly soon with the single online home that's coming on board, which will make it consistent across the country around how people can request those. But there are multiple ways for people to request. We also get a lot of requests from people via people that are advocating for them. So, for example, via IDFAs or via our third sector organisations that they can request, and they've got the route in to request them. So it is a fairly straightforward route, and then it comes into our domestic abuse team to look at, to assess it, and to do the research and contact that person that's requesting.
Mm-hmm. And have you any idea how many are refused? How many are accepted?
Yes, we look at that on a monthly basis through the PVP performance meeting. So we look at the timescales, because there are set timescales that you have to comply with as well. So we look at the numbers coming through, the numbers that are declined. So yeah, we have they're not here in front of us, but we do review that on a monthly basis.
You wouldn't know what they were roughly? as a percentage perhaps? Or,
Gosh,
no?
I think
no,
that
don't guess if you don't know.
I can bring the data. I do have the data. I just don't know off the top of my
Just
head.
be interested.
it's I would say it's anything between 20 and 30%. There might be anomalies and it's higher than that. 20 to 30% are refused because there might be justifiable reasons why we can't disclose or we don't need to disclose. So, and actually there might be other mechanisms by which they are already aware. So there's no reason to go down this route. But we do see. I see the data on that on a monthly basis.
Okay. Page 17, this is vulnerable people, 3.5.2, and you say there, this is resourcing again, you say there on the second sentence, staffing of our PVP investigation teams has been a priority. So are those teams now fully staffed?
So we do hold a couple of vacancies, temporary vacancies that will be filled fairly soon with the TI process. We don't hold many vacancies in the PVP team, and it's usually just for a short-term period because somebody's left and we're in the process of recruiting into those spots. And the other thing around our PVP teams is we put our more experienced officers in there. We want our detectives in there who have got the skill set to be able to deliver against these really complex areas. And actually already have the background to be able to go into our specialist courses because they need to be detectives to be able to get SCIDE up and SIDE trained. So we will always hold a couple of temporary vacancies as it filters through, but we hold very few in PVP.
Okay. And on the next 3.5.3, project Soteria, I remember writing a blog quite a number of years ago because I'd read about what was going on in Avon, Somerset, where this began, Bluestone, and
Bluestone, that's right.
Bluestone,
Yeah.
saying I'm sure this is something that all forces ought to be doing, and here we are. Now we are all doing this. I think it would have been helpful just to say what Project Soteria was. This is a public document, goes into the public domain. Public may not understand that, but can you say just briefly what it is so that we capture it on our...
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an approach which has been developed with a couple of pathfinder forces, from academia and the Home Office, to look at how we can enhance our response to investigating offences of rape and serious sex offences, working with CPS, as I say, academics, etc., to develop that approach. It's come out with several recommendations for all forces to adopt, which includes, as an example, additional enhanced training for all officers, but also being enhanced training for those that investigate it. That training package has been developed. But what's really important is it's advocating a very an offender-focused investigation rather than a victim-focused. So looking at investigating the offender rather than considering the vulnerabilities of the victim side of the investigation. So all those things are being brought from the national agenda and looking at how we can embed those locally.
Yeah. Suspect?
Suspect focused.
Rather than offender.
Suspect focused rather than victim. So rather
Yeah,
than...
no, I meant the word suspect is probably...
Well,
At that
there
point
will
they
be a
are
suspect
suspect.
until they
At
are...
that point they
they
are
are
a suspect. But you will receive further updates because we are an adopter force for Soteria. There have been Pathfinder and expansion forces that have gone before us. We actually volunteered to be one of the 14 extra expansion forces back in last year, time 2022. Unfortunately, we weren't selected for that. So we are the adopter force, but that doesn't mean we haven't been linked into Soteria throughout the last 2 years, because we have been and linking in with all of those forces that have been undergoing the transformation. So we've already incorporated quite a lot of the learning. There are 6 pillars under Soteria. Not going to surprise you. It's about repeat offending, suspect-centred investigations, engagement with victims, digital forensics, data. I always forget the last one, but I'll remember it in a bit.
Really impressive self.
And so but there are really tight timescales. So we've been announced as the adopting force. We have to comply and conduct a self-assessment in the next 8 weeks. That needs to be in by the 2nd of January. That will be our gap analysis, really, just to ascertain where do we stand, where do we need to go. We then have a few months to identify a transformative plan and then to implement it next summer. So the really tight time scale. So we have a project infrastructure set up around that. And we were also simultaneously doing some work around our RASO structures anyway. We'd started this last year. So we're running those two projects concurrently. So we'll understand our gap analysis through the self-assessment, but the concurrent work look at operating models and what staffing we require under different operating models is happening concurrently. So that will be brought together in the new year once we understand our gaps, to say, well, which one complements our gaps the most, and then we'll look at what resourcing we need to put into place to make that operating model function effectively for victims of rape, and hopefully look to implement that. Well, we will have to implement that by next summer. So
Does any funding come with this?
no, there's no funding. There was funding for Avon and Somerset, quite a substantial amount of funding for Avon and Somerset, and I think it's got lower as they went through the expansion forces, and there is no additional funding for us.
Okay. Thank you. Page 18, this is 3.6.3, CSE. Obviously rather a real issue for us, and always a matter of concern and focus. Again, I wonder if you could say something around this. You say in the second sentence, you talk about the changing threats and offending patterns. I wonder if you could say something about how are they changing, what are these?
Absolutely. So we know not just for child exploitation, but for quite a lot of offending types of online, and the online element is continuing to grow. The online, whether that's as a tool to implement the exploitation, or if it's actually online exploitation, but we're seeing an online risk developing and growing. So there's a lot of work ongoing around, firstly, how do we protect people from that? And making sure we have the skills within our teams to be able to deal with that and prosecute people as a consequence of that. We also see from a child criminal exploitation, so we talk about child exploitation in its broadest sense, we're seeing a greater overlap between CSE and CCE. We're seeing more children being exploited in both crime types rather than just the one type, and so that's a developing trend that we are looking at, and making sure that we can continue to deliver support and engagement in that space.
Is there any more that we can do in terms of educating the public around, particularly in Rotherham? Because I've been to a number of meetings over this past 6-12 months or so in the Rotherham district, where people still say CSE is all about the grooming gangs on the streets, and trying to get across and there are changing patterns. I think there's some real work that probably needs to be done around there in educating public opinion.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that we've been having this conversation in the partnership actually around how do we change the narrative for the public and for some of our professionals as well that still believe, because that's what you see in the media. You know, if it's a case brought to trial, it's usually a big case around a grooming gang, and we know that actually that's not the pattern of behaviour. That's not the predominant offending style within. Actually nationally, but certainly within Rotherham, it's usually one-on-one individuals rather than any sort of this organisation around it. So it is something we're looking at, trying to develop an engagement and communication plan against.
I mean, it's not to say there isn't.
Of course,
absolutely.
And we're always alive to that.
Absolutely. And you know, what we are absolutely confident in, numerous reviews that you know have happened during your time as Commissioner, shown us that we have the systems and processes and capacity and capability. When we do identify patterns of offending, we pick it up and we do something about it. And you are obviously well aware of all the preventative work that we do with many partners to prevent it happening in the first place. The simple fact of the matter is the world has moved on an awful lot in recent years, and you know, if you were to ask me my professional opinion, the threat of online abuse of young people and the effective policing of that is the biggest challenge that we face today, because it's so vast, and rather than dealing with an offender that might live in the South Yorkshire area, potentially dealing with an offender that lives abroad. So the capacity and capability and the continued need to innovate and invest in that area, an area that's just not seen to the public because it's all done covertly behind closed doors. That's a significant challenge, not just for South Yorkshire Police, but policing and law enforcement more generally.
I mean, just continuing on that, I was interested then in the next paragraph, 3.6.4, where you talk about bespoke training around child exploitation, kind of the next phase of all of this. The bespoke training, and I mean, presumably we lead the way a bit in this, do we, in South Yorkshire? Whether this is going to be something that can be rolled out force-wide, even nationwide, I don't know.
I'm absolutely sure it could. As you say, we lead the way. We lead the way in Rotherham. A lot of models we've had in Rotherham have been rolled out across the force and wider across nationally. We've been recognised as best practice, and we put a lot of investment as a partnership into it. So this will be awareness raising and training to all frontline practitioners from across the partnership, which will happen, which no one else will do. But that product will be captured, and we will disseminate it and share it to any area that wants to take that on board. And I think going back to raising awareness from a minute ago, the big thing for us is those, not necessarily always the public, it's those establishments where, or those locations where people are going to be able to see it. It's making sure they know what the patterns of behaviour are. So we talk about make safe, we talk about the takeaways, the hotels, the taxis, the areas where they can pick up the offender and they can see it and they understand what the offending patterns are, so they can recognise that's really important, and we invest a lot of money in that.
Yeah, okay. I'm moving on to page 19, 4, tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. As you know, because we talked the other day about this, I was in Binnington on a week ago in the evening for a meeting there, which was called by the 3 local councillors and also the MP for Rother Valley, and the meeting was ostensibly about crime and antisocial behaviour. Touched a little bit on crime. It was mainly about antisocial behaviour in the town, particularly young people in the town, and there was a fair degree of anger in the room and frustration in the room that they didn't feel they were getting the service they ought to have from the police. They didn't see the police and so on. I think you understand all that well. Now, I know a lot of activity has gone on. There wasn't an opportunity for me to say a lot because people were not in a receiving mood. They were more in a we want to make a point kind of mood. I get that and accept that. But if you could just say a word around the Operation Civitas, there will be patrolling now, ASB patrolling in Dinnington, because they're one of the hotspot areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say probably if you let me speak a little bit wider around Dinnington, because you're absolutely right, and the perception of antisocial behaviour, and we know this, perception sometimes is not reality, and we work really hard, and I think there's some things in here around the QR codes and the surveys we do to try and understand perception, because perception is really important. But Dinnington is an area where we do see regular spikes in antisocial behaviour linked to youth, and we do a lot of work in the Dinnington area. And as an example of that, antisocial behaviour did spike in the summer months. It spiked in August. By the end of August, we had what we would call a POPS-like plan in place, a problem-solving plan in place, with our partners around the interchange. This was bolstered by an already existing problem-solving plan that was in place around Tesco's, both youth-related violence, that had loads of patrols. We did plainclothes patrol to identify them. We were on the buses, we had bike patrols, we had engagement stalls, we did all sorts of work in those locations. That was bolstered by the Civitas patrols, as you talked about, which is the fund patrols to patrol hotspots. So they have designated zones, of which the high street areas are part of that zones, and they patrol through those for designated points of time. So there's an awful lot of work, and then we also had GRIP, and it was a focus for our Duxford for the last time. So there's an awful lot of engagement and work going on. And it is having a significant impact. It might not feel that, and that's what we need to understand from the public. It might not feel it's having an impact. But if you look at the spike in August, as a consequence of the work we've done, antisocial behaviour was reduced by 41% through September and October. So we know that the work we're doing is having an impact. We need to keep going, and we need to keep engaged, and we need to make sure we continue to review the work we're doing to make sure it continues to impact positively for our communities in Dinnington. But we do absolutely take it seriously, and we are in Dinnington and we are patrolling.
So recorded ASB is reducing?
Yes. It's reduced by 41%. The highest in the Rotherham area was Dinnington.
Okay.
Highest reduction, sorry.
Well, I said I'd go back in a couple of months' time and meet this group of people again and say what's happened and what the outcomes are. So you might like to come with me?
Yes, absolutely.
And we all will do that together. So okay. I notice on page 19, 4.13, right at the bottom there, reduction in burglaries. Mm-hmm. That's clearly very welcome, very good. Just again to note and say thank you very much for that. On to page 21. I'm doing a little bit of skipping about here, I'm afraid, but overall demand in 4.2.1. Again, it's the staffing issue in the neighbourhood. I'm not sure whether you you feel you've answered this, but when are the neighbourhood teams going to be fully resourced with PCs and PCSOs? Is that your March date, which we don't talk about because it's not dates?
No, and the specific neighbourhood challenges for us around staffing is a more recent one, I would suggest. So we've had a fair few retirements and a fair few PCSOs leaving the organisation over the last 6 to 8 weeks, whether that's through retirements or whether that's leaving it to other organisations. We've lost quite a significant number of our PCSOs, and it takes time because of the recruitment process for us to recruit and fill those vacancies that we hold. And that coincided with a couple of our police officers retiring or moving to other organisations or getting specialist roles. And a couple of our it's really positive news, but a couple of our really good neighbourhood officers getting through the promotion process, as an example. So there was a whole range of issues that happened at the same time, which has led to some vacancies, a significant number of vacancies. We've had adverts out, we're going to start filling those, so the first 3 people will be going into our neighbourhood roles as officers in the next month. And then we're re-advertising it towards the end of the year, and we will post some more in after the Christmas period. So we do have a plan in place to fill some of these vacancies, although we will have to maintain some level of vacancies, as we do across all of our pillars, so that it's fair and equal. But we recognise that neighbourhoods is really important to be staffed effectively, because they're the ones that are preventing the crime and engaging with individuals within our communities.
Well, this is the core of your operating model.
It is.
This is what you tell us repeatedly. So,
Absolutely. And whilst we do, I would stress, our neighbourhood teams are exceptional. I'm very fortunate to have some really, really good neighbourhood sergeants, inspectors, constables and PCSOs who are delivering some exceptional work. We just talked about the Dinnington reductions. There are some exceptional problem solving and reduction works. The burglary, we've talked about the reduction in burglaries, that we have POPs plans and problem solving plans, and prevention work around burglaries, which our neighbourhood teams lead on as well. So they're still doing an awful lot of really positive work, but I would absolutely like to increase their numbers from where they are.
Okay. I'm jumping on a little bit to page 26, item 7, which is safeguarding. And 7.1.1, you talk there about 3 dedicated missing from home MFH officers, enabling you, the rest of the sentence there, paragraph. I just wonder if you could say a little bit around missing from home officers and how they're doing there, and whether the high-risk ones, whether there isn't a way of getting in before they become high risk, whether we couldn't do more around preventing people going up to that point where there has to be escalating.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's absolutely the role of missing from home officers. So they're not there necessarily to find our missing from homes. That's our response function to do that. They're there to engage with our repeat missing from homes, engage with our premises where they're repeat missing from homes, where we go missing. So, for example, if we identify that there's repeat instances after the same child from one premises, we'll go and do some problem solving work with our partners in that location. We'll look at what we can do and trigger plans to put in place around our individuals to stop them from going missing. And the big thing, it feeds into, we know from a child perspective, a large proportion of our high risk tend to be because of our concerns around exploitation. And that's very much the work of the Evolve team to identify and developing trends so that we don't see that escalation to high risk, but actually we're dealing with our children much, much quicker. I mean, what I would say is our missing from homes have decreased significantly, and it's not on here, but if I look at my data around our high risk and repeat missing children, they're the lowest in the force because of that really strong partnership work that we have around missing children. Whether they are medium or high risk. If there's a missing child, we will always review it with our partners and look at what preventative work we can put in place to prevent them from being at harm.
Thank you. Page 29, 8.3, organised crime, OCGs. I mean, a number of the members of organised crime groups, gangs, finish up in prison. I wonder whether you had any regular kind of contact with prisons around that and those who are likely to come back into the district.
Yeah, absolutely. We have prison liaison officers who engage really closely with our Op 4 to 5 teams and our intelligence teams, so they will link in, identify make us aware of people that are coming out of prison. We will develop plans around them, but also linking in, see if we can get any intelligence or information that's appropriate through those prison liaison teams. So that's a direct link between the offenders in prison and our officers locally.
And depending on what the index offence would be, they would be subject to MAPA arrangements, depending on what they've been convicted for. So that solidifies those three partners, probation, prison and police, working together to minimise and mitigate any threat that they pose on release from prison.
And we've had some really good successes in Rotherham in the last few months around our organised crime and disruptions and prosecutions. And I think there's an example on there, Richard Riley, who was involved in armed criminality and has just been sentenced for 12 years. And we find obviously the sentencing, because it's organised criminality, is higher, and people are getting much lengthier prison sentences, which is a positive.
Sure. Finally, for me, on page 33, 9.2.4, right care, right person, that seems to be going well and releasing a lot of time for officers to do other things. Have you had any reaction from partners? What do they make of it? How are they responding?
As of anything, there's always a nervousness. Our partners feel engaged. From when I speak to our partners in health and in RIBC, they feel engaged in the process, and there's tactical and strategic groups. The first two phases seem to have gone fairly well, and in Rotherham I think it was probably a lot easier, because the second phase was very much around our absence from hospitals, and actually we already had really robust processes in place with our Rotherham hospital policies that have been mirrored now. Those Rotherham policies have been mirrored with the wider force hospitals. I think the nervousness is in the next stage. It's the mental health. There's a lot of work ongoing around the mental health side of things. But the feedback I get from those that are involved in the tactical groups is, whilst there was nervousness, when we go through the case studies, when we go through the actual cases, everybody sits there going, "You're right, this isn't a police issue," and it's getting our partners to reflect on some of the work that they're doing and how they're approaching work. And if I give you an example, I now meet on a monthly basis with the chief executive of the Rotherham Hospital, and we talk through all sorts of areas around the right care, right person and wider, and there's a recognition of actually how we can all do things differently to make sure that demand isn't pushed elsewhere. It's actually managed at source, and it seems to be working really well. So always a bit of nervousness, but people are engaged and it feels like it's going really well. I don't receive a huge amount of concerns raised.
So far so good. And that's stage 3. When does that actually start? Is that now?
I think it went live at the end of October,
Yes.
a couple of weeks ago.
Last week.
Yeah.
Yes. No. I think that's everything from me, Laura. Was there anything you wanted to raise or say that we haven't covered?
No, not at all, no. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if you want to stay, you're very welcome, or you may want to get back to Rotherham.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was item 10 then, Rotherham District Summary Update, and item 11 is the force performance against the police and crime plan, tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, one of the 3 priorities in the police and crime plan. And Tim, this is you, pages
It is, yeah.
35 to 54. We'll do the same thing if that's
Yeah,
all right.
by all means.
A lot of acronyms in this again.
We need to provide glossary, don't we?
Or
Yes,
just
of course.
stop using it.
It's just sort of bearing in mind that we hope members of the public will, see these. Or
I will appoint someone in my office the anti-acronym czar, because I tend to read them, and I do read them, but I think part of the issue is because I'm so familiar with them,
I know.
sort of they don't jump out at me. But I will appoint an anti-acronym czar.
Yeah, okay. 5 in 1 paragraph is overdoing it.
Fair enough.
Page 37, and you write there, a large reduction in theft from vehicle, this is crime volume and trends, a large reduction in theft from vehicle and a large increase in theft of vehicle.
Yeah.
That seems to be a shift or a trend
Yeah.
or a change there. When did you say something around that? So,
We have seen the change in vehicle crime this year. I mean, it's interesting when I was looking at this report today and then just looking at some of our very latest statistics that are right up to date. Vehicle crime in totality, we've seen a really big reduction over recent weeks. So we're now about 15% down across the course of the year.
15.
15. 6% down the year to date versus year to date last year, which is promising. And again, with all these statistics, depending on what sort of time period that you look at, I think the thing with vehicle crime is often trends get led by the design of particular vehicles, and then if there's a new design comes out or some new security feature comes in, that tends to shift offending. So it is quite volatile and it does vary. But overall, certainly year to date, financial year to date this year, we are starting to see a reduction in vehicle crime. And you'll recall that particularly in the immediate post-COVID era, we did see a really significant rise. That does appear to be turning down.
Thank you. Page 38, AWT, I think I worked that one out. Is that average wait times? Is that what that is?
So where are you looking?
In the box.
Emergency.
The bottom box. Emergency AWT.
Yeah.
The others I worked out, I think. So page 39, 6.4, it talks about the chart above. It's about average response times and Doncaster being an outlier.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's being addressed and how you do it.
I think the issue is Doncaster has always been an outlier in terms of response times. I think some of that is due to the geography of the area, because it's so vast. Certainly some of the staffing challenges at Doncaster I think have been more acute than other districts. And I think, like Laura alluded to, we're constantly trying to balance resources to manage risk, threat and harm over there. And you'll note further in the report, for example, Doncaster have invested in things like Operation Castle, targeting residential burglary to good effect. And I think it's a combination of things, of trying to manage the vacancy factor at Doncaster as effectively as possible, combined with the geography of the area, does make it more challenging in terms of just the sheer distance and the spread of resources across that area.
Yeah.
I think as we move forward, and we've already talked about our workforce plan. The fact of the matter is, on paper at the moment, is, as you're well aware of, Commissioner, we're as healthy in terms of the number of police officers that are now employed by South Yorkshire Police as we have been certainly in the last decade, and perhaps some significant period below that. When you look at the number of police officers that have been recruited in the last 3 years, that's very, very significant. 40% of the force has less than 3 years service, and they take time to become fully fledged police officers. And you have to overlay that with the fact that our vacancies are not for police officers with 3 years service, because people retire, people move on to specialist roles and things. So it's constantly a balance of trying to make sure that we leave enough resources in response policing to be able to meet that demand, but make sure as well that we can allow people to flow through the organisation, to make sure that we fill specialist roles in public protection. Economic crime is an ever expanding area. Serious and organised crime remains a constant threat, to make sure that we've got people with the right capacity and capabilities to deal with these varied threats.
The 40% with less than 3 years experience, that makes moving people around very difficult.
Well, we certainly try to take an innovative approach to it. So, when we are moving people into some more specialist areas now, certainly in the past, during my career, you might expect to go into serious organised crime after 10 years and things like that. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we are recruiting a balanced workforce and trying to, as far as we can, spread some of that inexperience around the workforce to allow people to gain different opportunities. But you've got to be quite cautious in doing that, because very high risk areas of policing require experience to deal with it. So you've got to try and balance. So our workforce deployment board, that's chaired by Dan Thorpe, is ACC, but is attended by senior officers from across the force. That's the governance structure that we have in place to monitor that on a month-by-month basis. And you'll be aware, because obviously officers from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner attend our people board. We put a significant amount of effort into looking at our demand, our future predicted demand, emerging areas of policing that we're going to have to resource in the future, to develop a workforce plan that will best address the capacity and capability needs of the force both now and in the future. But that's a complex issue. It is a complex issue. And as we've said, I think right from the start of Uplift, it's a nice challenge to have, to place an extra 700 odd police officers across the force, but it very much is a challenge. It's not simple. It's not as simple as perhaps the public might think it is.
It's a very difficult conversation to have with the public and to explain this. But again, when I go to meetings, the assumption is you've now got all these extra officers fully capable of doing everything and can be just moved around at will. And it's quite hard to explain. It's not like that.
The challenge you might have as well is you get 700 officers to the 3-year service mark, and yes, absolutely they're capable then of picking on a neighbourhood footprints or driving a response car and dealing with the day-to-day policing measures. But as I said, the people tend to leave the organisation from more specialist roles, specialist detectives, specialist public order, firearms officers, surveillance officers, people who've got specialist experience around economic crime and fraud and things like that. Now, even after 3 years, it's very difficult to envisage the situation where people have automatically got the experience to step into those roles. So you have a flow through the organisation, and it's engineering that flow that is the complex challenge for workforce planning. But it's one that we're absolutely aware of. We've got significant governance around it. But it's interesting when you talk about that date when it will feel different. I think the simple. I think as we move from a recruitment profile that is expanding the force to one that is maintaining the force, and that will happen through the course of this year and the course of next year. So the volume of new recruits is slowing to maintain them as opposed to increasing. I think then you'll start to see that alleviate. But it will be gradual. It will be over time, and we've got to make sure that we don't sacrifice the training of those new officers in terms of expediency just to stick them into a role that they're not necessarily equipped for two reasons. Is one, we'll lose them, and police officers are very expensive to recruit and they will leave if they're not trained properly, and two, the public deserve the very best trained police officers in South Yorkshire, and we've always been determined that we will provide the very best training, and the evidence of that is in terms of the Ofsted inspection of our apprenticeship scheme, which is obviously very, very good, and our attrition rates. The numbers of police officers that leave South Yorkshire Police at a very early stage of their service. And people do leave because they decide for whatever reason it's not for them, or they seek better paid employment elsewhere, but it's less than most of the forces in the country.
Okay, thank you very much. Not dates. I didn't introduce the dates. You introduced the dates. I'm very happy to forget dates and talk in different ways. So, page 40, 6.10. This is, well, I'll read what you say. The force has work to do. It's about response times. Has work to do to improve response times for both emergencies and priorities. I know what's said there, but I just wonder. I mean, the government are interested in targets around this area. May introduce them, I guess. How well prepared are we if that's...
So, well, certainly we gather an awful lot of data around response times, and we do monitor them, and there is significant management action both at a force level and at a district level in terms of making sure that we do everything possible to attend incidents in a timely manner. The trade-off with this is I do want officers, when they get to an incident, to deal with it to a high standard and to give a quality response. I think the challenge is, it is very, very easy to be able to encourage officers to go from job to job to job to job really quickly and not necessarily deal with what is in front of them to a satisfactory standard. That's not good enough. It's not good enough for the victims of crime and antisocial behaviour who call us and expect us to deal with them properly and empathetically. But two, it also creates failure demand. because invariably if it's not dealt with properly at that first point of contact, someone has to go back to deal with follow-up inquiries and things like that. So all of these things are a trade-off. Absolutely, response times are very important, and certainly where there is an absolute emergency, the public have a right to expect us to come quickly, and we do. But all of this, particularly when you've got not the more routine type incidents that aren't necessarily an emergency, what the public have the expectation to is the best standard of service when we get there. There's a question of making sure that we balance that with the resources that we've got.
On this question of failure demand, this is page 41, 6.15, failure demand. You say that 22% of priority graded incidents are not resolved upon first appointment of an officer. Are there lots of reasons why that is the case?
Well, it could be any number of reasons that we've got to go away and arrest someone. There are further inquiries to do elsewhere. So it could be any number of reasons.
So it's not easy to say.
People are not available.
Yes.
So when we do go, they're
so
not
getting
available.
your 22% down is
key.
Yeah.
So certainly when we talk about our video response software, if we can deal with certain categories of incidents there and then by having that video conversation with people, that should contribute in the medium term to reducing that number. A lot of the challenge is that people call us. It's not, obviously some people are quite happy to wait for us to get it, but then some people are not available. But there are a raft of reasons. It would be impossible to put it down to one particular thing.
On page 42, this is recruitment, 6.24, attrition in the force control room. I wonder whether any themes emerging here as to why this is the case, why people are losing people.
Not particularly. Certainly in the control room, the challenge that we have is, to work in our call centre is a challenging role, and we are in competition with many other commercial call centres where the subject matter and the things that you have to deal with are nothing like as potentially traumatic as the things that our brilliant staff deal with on a day-by-day basis. So there is an issue with attrition in the control room, but what we have done, and you'll be well aware because we've had numerous conversations about the performance of the control room over the last, I suppose, 18 months, where it is in an infinitely better place than it was perhaps 4 years ago, is that we have a constant recruitment pool now to make sure that we know what our attrition rates are and we recruit to that. And by the same token then, we do an awful lot around being in the control room and trying to make it the very best working environment for people that it can be. And to that tune, I know you're aware, Commissioner, of the significant investment that's been in terms of refurbishing the building at Atlas Court, making sure that it's a really nice working environment for people to work in the future. But we've got supportive and stable leadership in there now, and I think that's what's contributed to the really significant improvements in the force control room performance over the past 18 months.
Just below that, on 6.26, simply to note, this is the UK National Contact Centre Awards that you were nominated in. That sorry they didn't win, but they were up against extraordinary competition, so they did extraordinarily well, I think.
Indeed, and I think it's worthy of noting that they were the only, the only police force control room to be nominated. And given you look at some of the companies that they're up against, them people like Sage and the RAC, which are significant commercial enterprises with the investment capability to match, I think that's a good accolade for the force.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll certainly note that. Page 43, neighbourhood crime, and 7.7, you talk there about a neighbourhood crime investigator's handbook, and then working on a video which members of the public will be able to have access to at the point of reporting to support effective scene preservation, maximise forensic opportunity, etc., which seems very good.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether you'd given any thought to a video that is preventative rather than after the audit, as you're talking
Well, we do have comms campaigns that
Do an awful
obviously offer crime prevention advice, so in that initial stage.
Okay.
And I guess the difficulty is that we wouldn't be able to provide a video to everybody for crime prevention because it's based on the reporting of an offence.
A particular
Absolutely.
type, yes.
But this video that was being produced is based on good practice highlighted by HMIC from Surrey or Sussex. Sussex, I always confuse the two, but one of those southern forces that have developed this just to enable people to preserve the scene as best they can prior to police attendance. So it's something we're trying. It's something that tries to improve that service to victims. So it's something we're literally on the cusp of doing as part of our toolkit in response to burglary.
We do an awful lot of crime prevention work, both in terms of our media campaigns and the work of our design out crime officers. We've invested a significant amount in neighbourhood policing to all that is geared is dealing with the matters that issue most to local communities and as far as possible preventing them becoming victims of crime in the first place. But with neighbourhood crime, if someone is unlucky enough to be the victim of a burglary, forensic examination and forensic identification of the offender is without a doubt a significant investigative tool, and the ability to be able to maximise our ability to get forensic intelligence that will identify an offender is very often helped to what happens straight away. So if you think about a crime scene, if it's a murder scene, we absolutely lock it down and go through it with a really fine microscopic detail. That's just impossible to deal with for the sorts of offences that happen every day, and often a member of the public might find themselves in the middle of that scene right from the start. So this is about just trying to maximise our ability to get forensic identification material that will allow us to arrest an offender as quickly as possible.
Page 44, this is various retail crime, business crime. Big increase in business robberies. And I wonder if you could say something around what SYP is doing to support business in
so
this.
I think there's two issues. There's one, the increase in business robberies. The numbers are relatively small in terms of business robberies, but that's accompanied by a really significant increase in shoplifting. Whilst the report makes some reference to reasons behind that, without a shadow of doubt there's an organised crime element to that. So there's a combination of things. There's one, making sure that as a district level, our neighbourhood teams are engaged with local business forums and are engaged with local businesses. That there's effective problem-solving plans in place, working with businesses to protect them as best as possible. And then there's a rigorous pursuit of offenders, and we're absolutely determined to do that. And certainly when you look across the board, that's what's been done within neighbourhoods. Some of the results that we've had in recent weeks dealing with prolific shoplifters and people, I am quite encouraged that that is a priority for our neighbourhood teams, and it will continue to be so moving forward.
Page 46, dangerous dogs, just again to note that all the things that we've been raising here, are we okay? All the things that we've been raising here in public accountability boards are now national, and now we have the government going to put the Excel bullies on the dangerous dogs list and so on. So I think we can see something here that we've started, probably started here, but we've been able to contribute to that. So many thanks for what Dan Thorpe and all the others have been doing around that. On page 47, ASB, rowdy and inconsiderate behaviour, coughing, that sort of thing. It said incidents have significantly reduced during this period, but a sharp rise in off-road bikes and quad incidents. It's something I refer to all the time, and just again to make the point that the off-road bikes team are very popular. They do seem to get things done. So just again, not
They are,
coming great on
they
that.
are, but we've been really clear about our broader offer around rural crime, the off-road bikes team. That team, you'll be aware of undertaking a recent sort of review of our operation support. That team will remain, but I'm really clear in terms of what I want them to deliver. And I do want to see statistics like that turn around, and we'll continue to push to do that.
Yeah, sure. And then skipping a little bit, but on to page 50, this is 12.4, and in the bullet points there, almost at the bottom, adult safeguarding, 40 adult safeguarding, 34 child safeguarding referrals submitted. Are we talking county lines and sexual exploitation and so on here?
Yeah, I mean, this paragraph
They
relates.
seem very good results.
Yeah, it's our disrupting serious and organised crime. We've been very clear about our determination to deal with this. And I think whether you look at our 45 teams, whether you look at our vastly improved picture around financial investigation and asset seizure, whether you look at the work that we're doing with partners around human trafficking, the work that we've done through our most recent round of Operation Duxford, which have all had a human trafficking elements to them, we are determined to crack down on this and deal with gangs that are exploiting people. I think that those statistics you see there are just a reflection of that. And I'm confident that certainly with our improved profile around asset stripping and some of the investments that we're going to make as a result of the money that's now coming in as a result of taking assets off criminals, will continue to go down the county. And I think when you see some of the other statistics around things like firearm discharges and things like that, I think it definitely is starting to have an impact.
Yeah, thank you. And talking of what do you call it, asset recovery incentivisation scheme, ARIS, I've got to learn a new acronym. ARIS funding, page 51, and then over on page 52, and there's a table indeed at the bottom of 52. Yeah. We are now recovering substantial amounts. I noticed there is a bit of a difference between ourselves and West Yorkshire. I know West Yorkshire's a bigger. Have they been doing it longer? Is that why they're... I mean, 4 million is a lot of money.
I did, but if you look, they had a big hit in quarter 2. So some of it goes with the various... I think what we are seeing is a very, very improved picture. You're well aware of the challenge that we've got in terms of retaining staff in this area. It's a very skilled role, and there's a huge amount of demand from other agencies, National Crime Agency, various other government agencies, Food Standards Agency, you name it. They are looking to recruit financial investigators and will pay significant sums to get them. So it is a challenge for us. But again, it's one that we are, we're focused on, and certainly the leadership and the service leadership as ACC Crime, we're really starting to see some inroads in that now, and it is quite pleasing because this does help criminals, and it does make South Yorkshire a less attractive place to do business, if I can put it in those terms. And we're determined that we'll use every tool at our disposal to prevent people, committing serious and organised crime in the county.
Just to add to that, we, as a result, City of London did peer engagement with every force across the country, and they obviously came to us and reported back in 2022, and were impressed by our, not that we have everything perfect, because we don't by any stretch, but were impressed by our appetite for innovation, our appetite for really tackling this issue. So they invited me to go and present at a national economic crime briefing only 2 weeks ago. So I went down and presented our story. And the one key thing that, and it isn't down to me, it's down to the staff, Anna Sedgwick and Laura Huff, but we've really incorporated economic crime fraud into our serious organised crime, so seeing it as an organised crime issue, and in doing so being able to exploit the capabilities and tactics that we have available within our specialist capabilities, within our covert teams and our serious organised crime teams, and use those tactics to tackle these people that are intent on stealing money from often vulnerable people. and that was really recognised as a huge step in the right direction. So we've had some national endorsement, and other forces are now coming to speak to us about what we've done and how we've done it. But just to recognise the work, the really, really good work of the staff within our economic crime function, and we are looking to continue to invest in this area because we know that 40% of all crime is now fraud, and it will only rise, I think it's fair to say. So we've got a commitment to invest further in the next couple of years.
Well, I didn't realise that you'd done that. That's some recognition. That's really good, and we ought to thank that team for what they've done.
Yeah.
But these are impressive figures, because I can remember when we were moaning and complaining about how little we got by way of asset seizure. And it's a real pleasure when I go to community groups to say, this grant we're doing is where it's coming from. We're planning that money back into the community. I think that's everything there, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Unless there's anything you want to highlight or... Okay, thank you. So that was item 12, or, sorry, it was item 11, wasn't it? Item 12 is the fourth quarterly budget monitoring overview. Debbie, you're online. I can see you looking happy on the screen.
Just returned from a week's leave.
I see. You look as though you're still on leave. This is over to you then. 12. Do you want to give us some headlines?
Yes. So this is the quarter 2 report. So basically our best estimate of where we expect to be at the end of the year, based on information available at the end of September. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Am I coming through okay? Yeah. So we have seen an increase in the projected underspend since we reported quarter 1. I'm trying to present that position as clearly as possible by breaking it down into the underspends and the surpluses that are arising, and also so you can see those emerging cost pressures as well. So overall, that net position is a projected underspend of 3.5 million, which is about 1.1% of the budget. So we've broken it down, the underspend, we've broken it down into 5 areas. I won't go into utilities because we reported that in quarter 1. That equates to around 1.4 million. It's almost a quarter of the total underspend, and it's a positive news story for us because it will have a positive impact on future years. The area really, I think, the biggest area is the surplus income. That's around about 40% of that total underspend, and the biggest part of that is in relation to the pay award. So we prudently set a budget of 3% for the pay award. The Home Office, the pay award came out at 7%. The Home Office made an assumption that forces had built 2% into the budget, so they've given us the difference between the 2 and the 7%. So we've benefited from an extra 1% because we put 3 in, not 2. And that equates to £1.8 million. So it's a significant amount of money that we couldn't have predicted when we set the budget. And again, it's a nice problem to have, but it does add to the underspend. If that continues, and we are assuming it will, we've had it confirmed for the current year and next year that they could review the way in which it's allocated. But if that continues, again, it will have a positive impact on future years. There are other elements of income as well that we've stretched the police uplift programme target from 3039 headcount officers to 3049, and we're also benefiting from Op Safeguard. Both of those are one-off funding that will only impact on the current year. They won't be of benefit to us in future years. So again, it adds to the underspend in the year, but not something we could have predicted when we set the budget. So that's utilities, that's income. Other areas, we have achieved some in-year savings, and we're looking at those to see whether there's any permanent savings that we can capture and again benefit us in future years. We know that we've got a significant gap in the budget in future years, so all savings are welcome. We have underspend on growth, and this really is an area for the force to focus on. That's around about £1.6 million at the moment, but the biggest area is the IT target operating model. We know that the IT collaboration has been under review for some time. We know that is just a timing issue, that funding will be required, but we're just not at that point yet, and that does account for roughly half of that £1.6 million. Other areas are in relation to officer expansion. This is rank, not numbers. where FCT have reviewed that and made some changes which ensure the frontline policing numbers are protected. And we have also got areas where, you know, in staff areas particularly, where we are seeing difficulties in recruiting and retaining staff. And again, that leads to posts not being filled and growth not progressing as planned, and ultimately resulting in underspends. So I think I've covered the underspend areas. So just a little bit on the cost pressures then, because whilst we've got some significant underspends, we've also got some significant cost pressures emerging. So we've got a significant amount of new demand in relation to the pensions remedy calculations. This is following the McLeod judgment. We don't have the full software solution, so we're faced with significant manual effort here to turn those calculations around by March 25. We've got a small pensions team, so we have no choice really there but to outsource some of that work. We've got some costs associated with RAC at Doncaster. We've got some additional cost pressures in the vehicle replacement programme, particularly in relation to inflationary pressures and write-offs. We've got emerging costs from dangerous dogs, which we've known about that for some time, but those costs keep going up and up. And it also creates opportunities for us to pursue priority-based budgeting tranche 2, because we've just concluded tranche 1. We want to continue on that journey to ensure that force resources are in the right place, and also identify where we can achieve efficiency savings and cash flow savings. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we've got that significant budget gap in future years. We're looking at areas where we can bring work forward, so we can reduce pressures on future years as well. And we are currently working on other areas where we might be able to reduce some of that pressure, particularly on next year. So, for example, the external training budget we know is oversubscribed next year. Could we bring some of that training forward so that we don't have to put that pressure on next year's budget? So they're the key areas really. It's the summary part of the report, focusing on the underspends, the surpluses, and the cost pressures. But there are some significant figures going either way, which in total results in a projected underspend currently.
Yes, thank you very much, Debbie. But these are forecasts, of course. We always have to remember that, because otherwise there are those people in the community who read about underspends and think that we've got it covered, stuffed with £5 notes that we can use on whatever. So, okay. Steve, did you want to ask anything?
No, I mean it's an incredibly comprehensive report, isn't it? And it goes into some significant detail on each one of them. The good thing about those extra income is that there's no costs that go alongside them, which usually happens when you get extra income. So it bodes well for the future, but it will continue to be complex and complicated.
Yeah, and it's going to be a hard financial year next year, I think, is all the mood music that we're getting from the Home Office. So, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. That was item 12. Assurance reports. Independent ethics panel. Mike, 13.
Thank you. Well, this is in a sense an update on our continuing work on stop and search. We can offer assurance that the scrutiny mechanisms are effective. The public engage properly. The officers leading the process are fully committed to transparency and accountability. The continuing challenge remains the thorny issue of proportionality in relation to citizens from non-white communities. And whilst it's very clear that officers are aware of that and the force leads are aware of that, there is still some work to be done to really understand the phenomenon. And at paragraphs 12 and 13, we can only offer really limited assurance. There are two areas which are difficult. One is that the practice, the requirement, is that anybody who stopped and searched should be invited to identify themselves in terms of their ethnicity. And that doesn't work well. There are operational reasons on occasions where a stop and search doesn't take place under the most favourable circumstances, and asking somebody, would you mind telling us how you identify ethnically, can be tricky. But it's also the case that officers fail routinely to do that as much as they ought. So we have to make you aware of that, because it's a gap in terms of the intelligence that needs to be around understanding who is stopped and so on. Coupled to that, at point 13, is the failure to record the true location as an absolutely routine part of the procedure. And I think the reason we're drawing attention to that is that 4 or 5 years ago we would have said using body-worn video doesn't happen on a routine basis, and it does now. There are occasions when it doesn't, but it is not controversial, it is not problematic, it is simply something that officers do. But that is not the case in terms of using the technology and the recording to be able to tie down exactly where a stop and search has taken place. The hunch that we follow is that, based on figures that have been provided, 57% of stops and searches relate to drugs. It isn't possible with sufficient security to be able to tie where that happens to particular locations and potentially to ethnicity, and that creates the opportunity for people to make assumptions about where it happens that may not be accurate at all. So, to be completely blunt, I mean, there are parts of South Yorkshire which have got heavy concentrations of non-white citizens, but there are many parts of South Yorkshire where non-white faces are almost absent, even within Sheffield. What we can't say with security is whether stop and search reflects that. So there are two areas. One is actually collecting self-identification by ethnicity, and the other is improving the recording of the location. And were those two things to be achieved, I think we would be in a position to be even stronger in the assurance that we can offer that actually, notwithstanding those two comments, stop and search is operating properly to very high standards, and that the scrutiny mechanisms, both internal and external, seem to be fully embraced by SYP. That's it.
Right, thank you very much.
And I think it's fair to say, Michael, isn't it, that Gareth is on with both trying to resolve both of those issues. He presented to our Force Performance Day last week around stop and search, and he highlighted those two issues that you've just done there. And there is a solution for doing the location with a pin drop, so we're trying to push that through because that should be relatively straightforward. And the self-defined ethnicity, as you said, is difficult in some circumstances.
Can be. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the work that Gareth is doing, and I think I ought to have said that Gareth is the third force lead in maybe 4 years. And the transitions have gone remarkably smoothly, which would lead us to conclude that the approach to stop and search and the standards that are being sought are properly embedded in the thinking, if you like, the values and behaviours of the force. It could not have been
as
easier.
That's right.
And wouldn't have known that when Chris Foster left to go to GMP.
That's right.
Did you say a pin drop?
There's something on the...
What's a pin drop?
With Google Maps and things like that, you can just you can identify where you are and just pin. You can drop a little pin on the map, and that will indicate exactly where you are. So there is apparently the technology within our devices to do exactly the same, which will then interact with the Pronto device, so the Pronto app, which will then say, okay, you are exactly here on Carbrook Hall Road at this time on this date, and that's when you did your stop and search. So even if officers pin it and then shut it down for completion later, because there is real challenges in controlling individuals as well as doing the kind of admin piece, at least it's there recorded. Sometimes you won't even be able to do that because of the issues that you're facing, but I think if we can increase that usage, it will give us a more...
That's exactly the pressure point, that officers still tend to write up afterwards because they're so busy dealing with the events that present there and then. And being able to just do that extra little step,
It's still
as was the case with turning on body-worn video, would give assurance that at the moment is...
And that's the issue. That's
not
not
bad.
the issue. This is not people just not bothering it. It's generally
Yeah.
operational demands, dealing with risks, dealing with people who might have been arrested, and they actually complete the stop and search record. Sometime later, back at the station, back at the custody suite, wherever else it might be, then doesn't geolocate exactly where the stop and search took place in the first place. There's a technical solution around it that I'm sure we can bring forward. But I think the thing about it, it's pleasing you saying, Michael, about Gareth's leadership of this, but it does have significant executive oversight as an issue. We get reports regularly as part of our performance pack to our senior command team on stop and search performance, the stop and search performance headlines, because we recognise that it is an issue of concern of the community. And I think I just always add, in terms of the litmus test around this, we get very, very, very few complaints about stop and search.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Insofar as we can be reassured, we're reassured, I think. And,
There's still work to be done,
yeah,
but it's good to hear that we're not telling you anything you don't know, far from it.
That's right.
of course, the key variable is social class, but we won't go down that road. No, we won't.
Location accuracy would
Provide
contribute to
some-
understanding
It would.
that part of the
It
phenomenon.
certainly would. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. That was the ethics panel. 14 is JIAC, and again a good report. Steve, do you want to pick any headlines out?
Yeah, the main headline, as has been the case I think for the last 2 years, is the IT governance. Still got a risk about that. We're expecting a report next month to identify what the solution is going to be. So we'll look forward to that. Our meeting's on the 6th of December, I think, or something like that. We received lots of assurance, as you can see. Our new internal auditors are bedding in quite well, and they've provided us with an audit plan that they expect to deliver within the short year that they've got to deliver it. External audit, we're expecting a clean audit. However, there are still some things that I've identified here, closing valuation of land and buildings, and the valuation of the pension fund, and the fact that the pension fund, as in most authorities these days, is in surplus because of interest rates. And those things need to be closed off before they can actually give us their opinion. I know that work's going on in the background. They're expecting value for money to come, their value for money assessment to come to JIAC by Christmas. I think it's important to note that we're in advance of lots and lots of other authorities across the country in the fact that our external audit work's been done by this time of year. Lots of other authorities, police authorities particularly, and local authorities, are actually still doing last year's work. And I think we should recognise the work that goes on within SYP and within OPCC to make sure that that information is available to the external auditors so that they can get the work done as quickly as possible. So we're actually doing really well at that point in time. I think that's as much as I want to pick out of the report, but there's everything else there that anybody, if you want to ask me any questions.
Thank you very much. Just on page 68, the PCC update at the JIAC meeting, it's true, I did say that. A tight financial settlement is expected for the coming year. It's anticipated that precept will be lower this year because it's an election year. I take it all back. It looks to me as if the Home Office is such difficulty they're going to load it onto the precept and indeed
Right.
on the council tax, so I don't think I can say that anymore.
Okay.
Right, anything else on JIAC, anyone? Everybody happy with that? Thank you very much. Chief Executive reporting, 15, trust and confidence. Michelle, 73, 76.
Yes, thanks, Commissioner. This is a report from us in the OPCC just in relation to one of the 4 fundamental principles that you've put in your peace and crime plan this year in relation to those areas that underpin the 3 priorities that you're looking to see progress against. So trust and confidence in policing is topical nationally. When you first came in on a by-election in 2014, Commissioner, there was very much, yes, a long time ago now, there was very much local trust and confidence issues in South Yorkshire Police. The force is in a completely different place now, but still will be affected by national issues of trust and confidence arising if we are to see things in the Met, they arise sort of nationally and then are impacted locally. So the Home Secretary has it as a priority of hers. The force has done a lot of work in this area. And if you have a look at paragraph 3.3, the Chief Constable reported at your May Public Accountability Board on the work that was going on. Primarily, it has to be said, on internally focused work around standards, policing standards, and culture, leadership and culture, building on the work that had already been done by this Chief Constable and a previous Chief Constable. The exception to that internal focus, of course, was the violence against women and girls work around those areas of the communities that have a lack, potentially, of trust and confidence following the events reported in the Met. I think it's right to say the Deputy Chief Constable and I have agreed that there will be one more trust and confidence report before the end of your term of office, Commissioner, just to build on what was reported in May. And I think what we're going to work on is those external factors. So your assurance that the force understands the drivers of public trust and confidence here in South Yorkshire rather than those national issues, and that they're addressing them. We heard from Laura on the back of the Rotherham report, for instance, about the sometimes a disconnect between actual levels of ASB and public perception of ASB. Tim would say that the neighbourhood policing model is part of the bedrock of trust and confidence, and that's proven with academic research. But it's understanding those local drivers in our local context. The report also covers the work of the assurance panels, and you've heard from them today, as you do at each of your Public Accountability Board meetings. We've spoken to the assurance panel chairs about getting out into the public domain more of the work of the assurance panel as assurance to communities that you are holding the chief to account, you're having assurance in certain areas that do affect trust and confidence. And we've heard from Michael about stop and search as one of those examples. It's pleasing to say that some of the work of the IEP has been recognised nationally. So, for instance, the digital checklist that the ethics panel came up with around the advances in AI and facial recognition and those sorts of advances that can affect trust and confidence have been picked up by the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, who have asked for that to be part of their notable practice. So I think there are things that we do that we perhaps need to just get out there into the public domain, because the public don't know that they're happening necessarily, but that are integral to the levels of trust in South Yorkshire. So we will be bringing that report back from the force before the end of your term of office, Commissioner, and doing more on the website in relation to the work of the assurance panel.
Okay, found us here. Any comments, questions?
The only question I was going to raise is the Independent Advisory Panel for Policing Protests. It would be useful for us to link in with the current protest situation that we do. What we're doing.
Meeting tomorrow afternoon.
Oh, I just want to make sure it was happening, so that's good news. Good. And I think as it evolves, it'll be really interesting to see different perspectives as well.
Yes.
Good, thank you very much for that, Michelle. On to 16 PCC decisions.
Only one, Commissioner, in
Only
relation
one?
to, yes, only one of public significance that's
I see.
reported. You've made other decisions, of course. Funding in relation to a federation welfare vehicle, but there's a saving reported against the budget provision there.
Okay, received that, thank you very much. 17, the work programme.
Just to highlight another of your 4 principles was victim focus. So there'll be a report from the force at January's Public Accountability Board, and OPCC officers are working with SYP on what that will contain.
Okay, thank you. So we come to item 18 is any other business. Is there anything from anyone? Anybody happy? Well, no, not happy, but we've come to the end of the meeting. So item 19 is the date and time of the next meeting, which is the 8th of January 2024. Is there anybody online who I will not see before Christmas and the New Year? Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Okay, thank you very much.